Good evening, my friends, and shalom to all of you all out there. I'm getting ready to do, or actually, I am doing a weekly series now, and this first part of this weekly series is entitled Identity Theft, because the enemy comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And the first thing he does is he steals. And what does he steal? He steals your identity. He steals the identity of people who don't know the Lord and who don't know who they are in the Lord. And so I want to show you over the next couple, 2-3 weeks, what's going on in this nation and in the world concerning identity theft. And no, I'm not talking about the people who sit down in basements working on computers who are stealing your personal information. I'm talking about true identity theft. And so we're going to get right into this tonight. John 10:10 says, "The thief comes in order to steal, kill, and destroy. But I, Yeshua, have come so that they may have a life and have it in the fullest measure." So how we gain life is through Yeshua Messiah. It's not through all these things that we fill our lives up with constantly. It is through him and through him alone. He is the one who created you. He is the one who gives you your identity and enables you to step into it and fulfill your calling and your purpose in the earth. So how does the enemy steal? How does the thief steal and kill and destroy? Through lies and deception. Satan gets into your head, tells you that you're not who you think you are. You're not who God created you to be. And once you start beginning to believe these lies, that's how he can step into the killing and the destroying part. It starts with the lies in your head that you believe about yourself, that you're nobody, that you're not good enough, that you made too many mistakes, that you're too young, that you're too old, you're too this or too that. That's how the enemy starts, by stealing your identity, by lying to you about who you are. And so let's see what this battle actually looks like. It's raging on two fronts. If we have eyes to see, we can together in love and unity, those of us who belong to Yeshua Messiah, we can overcome the battle that's raging within the church, and then we can war together to defeat the enemy from without. The battle raging outside the church is for identity, the identity of each individual, and collectively the identity of a generation. It has been a systematic attack that began decades ago. The fighting off of religious constraints, literally throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so what happened within the church? Rules, regulations, religion, tradition, the propping up of each individual denominational sacred cows, saying that you have to adhere to these rules and regulations. You have to do this and do that and do something else, and don't do this and don't do that. And those are the things that held people in bondage. What does Paul say in Galatians? Why are you taking to yourself another yoke of bondage? Jesus came to fulfill the law. He came to set you free. Who the Son sets free is free indeed. But the church has taken to itself a whole new set of rules and regulations, a whole new group of do's and don'ts. And that does not look good to the world. The world comes in and they go, what are we doing here? They don't see love. They don't see unity. All they see is the list of do's and don'ts. And so they walk in the door and they walk right back out the door. We cannot reach the world with the good news. This is supposed to be good news of Jesus Messiah. We cannot do it if we throw rules and regulations in people's faces, and if we make people try to look like us. People have to be who they're called to be. We have to be able to raise and train people up. The church needs to look like the Book of Acts church if we're going to turn the world upside down, not like it looks like today in so many places. And yes, a lot of places are moving and they're shifting and they're changing into more of an apostolic model. But we're not turning the world upside down because we're not walking yet in the place we need to walk in. We have not stepped into our identity yet as a church. So as a result of that, what's happening in the world? And I think you guys are all aware of this. We kicked God out of the public schools in the 1960s. We allowed an atheist to get into our court systems and convince our Supreme Court justices that we don't need God in our public schools. And so we kicked God out in the 1960s, and the church was asleep. They did nothing about that. And subsequently, a decade or so went by, and it seemed like nothing was going to happen. But God was just waiting for us, the church, to rise up and do something. And we did nothing. And so then school shootings started happening and bombings started happening. And schools became an unsafe place for our children. Violence took over. And it's gotten far worse today than it ever used to be. The world's answer to unwanted pregnancies that were created by the free love generation was abortion on demand. So in the late 1960s, early 70s, what was the big mantra was sex, drugs, rock and roll. And so a whole generation of young people threw off the constraints of religion and tradition and society, threw out the baby with the bathwater, as it were, and took on a new identity that they called freedom, but in fact it was bondage. And the response to that was dramatic increase in sexually transmitted disease, dramatic increases in drug and alcohol use and abuse, dramatic increases in unwanted pregnancies. And because of these things, abortion on demand was pushed through, and the church slept, and the church did nothing. Then there was a takeover of media and journalism where even family programs are rife with unwed couples sleeping together. And nowadays, every single one just about has got the token gay person thrown in there for good measure. Commercials are filled with sex and violence, where the far left liberal agenda is promoted as normal and daily on the evening news. Guys, the media, the news, all of these avenues that we fill our eye gate and our ear gate with daily, these things were not normal. These things would have been considered horrific 30 years ago. They are normal and commonplace now. Our children are watching TikTok videos filled with sex and violence, and they're inoculated to that stuff to the point where they consider it normal. And the church does nothing. Government takeovers by the ultra-liberal elite are now creating laws that are legalizing evil. We're in the last days, guys. They are calling evil good and good evil. Education not only turning a blind eye to the far left, but perpetrating assaults against our children without our say-so. Now they are saying that children have the right to choose their own gender, and parents do not have the right to interfere with that. These things ought not to be so. We as the church should be up in arms about these things. We should be saying no to these things. But nobody wants to rock the boat, and nobody wants to mess with the status quo. And so too many people are giving in to get along. We have got to quit doing that. We have got to take back our schools. We've got to take back these government mountains, these political mountains. We have got to take back the mountains of influence in our nation so that our children suffer no more. The suicide rate among gender transitioned individuals is 4 times higher than the normal rate for that age group. 4 times higher. Does that tell you something's wrong with this? We need to put a stop to these things. So how are we going to do that? Isaiah prophesied about our day. Isaiah 5 verses 20 through 24 says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who change darkness into light and light into darkness, who change bitter into sweet and sweet into bitter." And I want you to know that biblically, light and darkness simply means knowledge versus ignorance. So we have knowledge. We walk in the light. They walk in the darkness. They're walking in ignorance. Woe to those who seeing themselves as wise, esteeming themselves as clever. Woe to those who are heroes at drinking wine, men whose power goes to mixing strong drinks, who acquit the guilty for bribes, but deny justice to the righteous. Therefore, as fire licks up the stubble and the chaff is consumed in the flame, so their root will rot and their flowers scatter like dust, because they've rejected the Torah, the word of the Lord of angel armies. In the Hebrew, it says the Torah of Adonai Tsabaoth. That's the Lord of the angel armies. They have despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Proverbs 17:15 says, "He who justifies the wicked and who condemns the righteous, both alike are an abomination to the Lord." So this is what God thinks about all this mess that's going on. Abomination is defined by Webster's 1828 dictionary as extreme hatred, detestation. God views these things with extreme hatred. The Hebrew word for abomination is toabah, and it's something that's morally disgusting. It's an aberrance, detestable, odious, expressive of extreme opposition. This is how the Lord views what's going on today. Recently, the Lord prayed through our group of intercessors the following prayer. The cleansing, and this is a prophecy for where we're at now. The cleansing is happening in the body of Messiah. The winds came, but he's not in the winds. But he blows his breath on the remnant, even as natural winds bring destruction to the earth. The earthquakes are here and coming, but he is not in the natural earthquakes. He is shaking everything that can be shaken, though, in the hearts of his people. The fire is coming, but he's not in the fire. He is about to ignite our hearts, even as parts of the globe will be battling fires in the natural. He is saying, ready or not, here I come. Will we allow the cleansing to take place so we are ready for the habitation of his wind and his fire? Remember, Hurricane Ian formed at the beginning of Rosh Hashanah this year, the beginning of the new year, the head of the year, and it dissipated right before Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. It was the most destructive hurricane to hit Florida, rated as a Cat 4. It was almost a Category 5. Did the church feel the wind of the breath of his presence? The Feast of Tabernacles ended October 16th. And since then, there have been 15 major earthquakes globally over 6.0 on the Richter scale. 15 since Tabernacles, October 16th. That's an average of one major earthquake globally somewhere every 3 days. Do we feel his shaking? Guys, cleansing happens in the church first. And that's what God is doing right now. Because we have got to take a stand. We have got to stand up for what's right. We have got to put aside the ignorance, the darkness. We have got to quit compromising with his word and what's going on around us. Do we feel the shaking? So what does all this have to do with identity and identity theft? What's happening in our world? Remember, guys, we are in this world, but we are not of it. We are of the kingdom of heaven. We are ambassadors sent from the kingdom of heaven to colonize planet Earth with the good news of Yeshua Messiah. But we have not been colonizing this planet. We've been making converts, but not disciples. We have set up a form of religion, but we've denied the power. And until we walk in true power and healings and giftings and miracles, the world is not going to think we have anything to offer them. And so here they are running wild with identity theft and not even seeing it. What's happening in our schools right now with Gen Zers? Gender reassignment is happening in the name of freedom. We have the truth of freedom, but they're being told in school gender reassignment is their ticket to freedom. The pendulum has swung so far to the left, we can't even find center point anymore. Our kids, the Gen Zers who are being called to lead the greatest move of God on earth, are being indoctrinated to believe they don't even know what gender they are. They're not asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? They're asked, do you feel like you're a boy or do you feel like you're a girl? This is utter filth from the pit of hell. Parents by law are not even told what's happening, and they face prosecution if they oppose or interfere with the gender-free choice of their kids. That's filth. That's garbage. Hospitals are performing radical, permanent surgeries on children to change their genders. Many of these kids, years later, are so filled with remorse and regret, but they're powerless and they're shamed and they're condemned by society that they are committing suicide at a fourfold rate. What's happening in our government? A bill was recently passed, rapidly becoming known as the Disrespect for Marriage Act, supposedly granting more rights to the LGBTQ community, but in fact, it does not add any more rights that are not already on the books for them, but it does restrict our religious freedoms. Staunchly biblical senators are trying to reverse some of this, but they face an uphill battle. This came from Matt Staver just the other day. Last night, the Senate rejected all 3 of the Republican religious freedom amendments and then held its last vote passing the Disrespect for Marriage Act. Their votes expose virulent hatred for anything religious and the desire of some to attack and silence people of faith. However, because the worthless Baldwin Collins amendment was added, this bill must now return to the House for a final vote. We have one more chance to stop H.R. 8404, which is the name of that bill. And what that bill does basically is it says, if you are a church and a gay couple comes up to you and they say, I want you to marry me, we have no religious right to say, no, that is against our beliefs. We will not do that. If you're an ordained minister, you can be fined and even put in jail if you refuse to conduct a gay marriage if this bill goes through. Guys, this stuff is serious. If we don't take a stand now, if we don't press in and fast and pray and seek the Lord, if we don't write our senators and congressmen, this bill's going to go through because they're trying to push it out in the lame duck session we're in right now. This bill will go through. And we're going to pay a horrific price for this. Young people are having their identities stripped from them without realizing what's happening, while many in the church stick their heads in the sand. We have lost too many battles on the mountains of influence, but we can and must take back ground from the enemy on our knees. We have to do this, guys. We have to do this. If we do not, we will lose this entire society. And yes, there have been lots of dreams. There's been lots of prophetic words about a 1 billion soul harvest and about God taking back America and all of America will be saved. And I believe that. But I also know that the prophetic word must be warred for. It must be contended for. If you don't stand and press through and pray, God will give your promise to someone else, or it won't even happen at all. An entire generation fell in the wilderness because they operated in fear, they refused to lay hold of the promise of God, and they walked away. And I'm saying, not today, Satan, not on our watch. This is not going to happen. And so I would like for you to join me in intercession. This bill goes through to the House on Monday morning. which for where I'm at right now, tomorrow morning, this bill goes to the House on Monday for a vote. And we need to pray that either it get delayed until the lame duck session is over and we have more people on our side who adhere to biblical values who will vote it down in January, or that it dies an unnatural death. We can pray that. We know in 2 Chronicles 7:14, the Lord said, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and forsake their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land. We need our land healed, guys. This is no joke. This is serious business. So I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in and for listening in. I'm going to pick up next week. I'm going to start calling this Saturday Night Lights, because it's going to be light. It's going to be knowledge. It's going to be illumination. And the Lord willing, every Saturday night, except for probably Christmas Eve, I will be doing Saturday Night Lights and discussing more of this. And next week, we're going to pick up where I left off on identity theft. So shalom to you guys. Pick up your swords, pick up your shields. It's time to go to war.